Okay, please give him a super warm welcome.
Hello. So I'm going to do an introduction, and the way I'm going to do the introduction is something I borrowed from a friend of mine who's a professor of history, and during the pandemic I did a course of his on how to write an introduction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer 4 questions. Why me? Why you? You might be thinking that now. Why this? And why now? So why me? Well, I'm going to talk about delivering the impossible, which is basically delivering software development project management. And I've been doing that now 15 years, but I've also been involved in the software development industry 31 years, a very long time. I've seen all this stuff just recently about Windows 95. I remember it coming out. So I've been doing this quite a long time. But also, I think I've got a slightly different take on this because I have a degree in philosophy, and there is no cure. Once you've done that, you can't go back. You can't stop seeing things in a different way. 2 things people say to you as a result of you having a philosophy degree is, how are you going to get a job with that? Haven't had any trouble, mysteriously. And the other thing is, that's quite philosophical. They say that very often. So some of the things I'm going to say tonight may be a slightly philosophical. I think I've got a slightly different take on project management. So that's why me. Why you? So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the fact that software is eating everything. And so everybody here is probably in the first category. When I did this at the Fringe, I had 3 different categories of people. One is people who are directly involved in software development in some way. Is that everybody here pretty much? Yeah, so there's no problem with the YU one. But my argument when I did this at the Fringe was, actually, even if you're not involved in software development is involved in you, right? It's coming for you in some way. Software is eating everything, dating, politics, food delivery. It's terrifying, right? So there's a kind of second group like that. And then the third group that I kind of cheekily said was everybody else. And I talked about the guys, presumably it's men and women, who live on the island in the Indian Ocean who don't want to contact with any other human beings. And the only pictures they have of them are of throwing spears at drones. And some poor guy was a missionary who went there and they killed him. So like, maybe those guys, it's okay to leave them alone. And what I'm saying is it doesn't affect them. When I did this in Edinburgh, one of the guys who was in the audience said, actually, I'm a missionary. So maybe it affects a lot of people. So that's why you. Why this? Why am I going to talk about the thing that I'm talking about tonight? Well, what I'm going to talk about tonight is a quote from a chap called Alan Kay. Anybody heard of him? Computer science pioneer. If you've not heard of him, you will have definitely heard of 2 of the things that he was involved in. Windowed graphical user interfaces and object-oriented software development. Right? So he worked at Park in the 70s. He's a very, very clever man. And he said something that I thought was really, really interesting. He said, point of view is worth 80 IQ points. So changing your point of view can make you very, very smart. Unfortunately, there's a downside to this as well, which is changing your point of view in the wrong way or refusing to change your point of view can make you very, very dumb. So what I'm going to talk about today is a bunch of different ways of looking at software development and project management. And part of the reason for this is I got tired of reading books that said, this is the way, this is the one true way. You do things this way and everything will be lovely. And if things aren't lovely, it's your fault because you haven't followed the way, right? So I got tired of that kind of book. And so like the book that I've written is like, here are a bunch of different ways, right? Maybe you can stitch these together. Maybe you can see things in a different way as a result of looking these different ways. So that's why this. Why now? Well, I mentioned this a little bit with software eating everything. The chap who said software is eating everything is a chap called Mark Andreessen. who wrote Netscape, so one of the earliest browsers, and he's now just a billionaire and says mad tech bro shit like, it's immoral to oppose AI. He said that just recently. And so he's one of the people who says that kind of mad tech bro stuff. But the software is eating everything thing really, really resonated with me, because I did realize that like kind of all of the fundamentally important parts of your life, software is nibbling at them or has completely devoured them. Finding love, just hooking up, having music recommended to you, having entertainment recommended to you, getting food, politics, finance, getting a job. All of those things to some degree have been devoured by software. So it's a very, very important part of our lives. And so this is a very good point, I think, to think, are there any better ways of doing this? Because the people who can do software development well are some of the richest people in the world, and they have enormous amounts of control. More control now maybe than governments. So it's quite an important thing. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about a bunch of different ways of seeing software development. And one thing that I did in my Fringe show is I wanted to kind of add some jokes. And the thing that I found really difficult about adding the jokes is fitting them in with warming to whatever I was talking about, right? So what I've done is I've just written the jokes down on a bunch of cards. And as I remember, when I've talked about a topic, I'm going to also ask somebody to pick a joke. I'm going to tell a joke as well. We'll see how well that works. Maybe it won't work at all. But what I'm going to do is going to shuffle these. So I'm not going to talk about them in a specific order. And somebody just, whoop, I'm going to trip over a power cable. Somebody want to pick just one of these topics? Ship. You actually picked two. Sorry. But anyway, right. So I was actually just talking to Royd about this. This is an idea that I got because I did a course in improvised comedy. And the reason I did a course in improvised comedy is because I lived in North London, and those are the rules. And so I was doing a course in improvised comedy. I read a book by a chap called Keith Johnson, who was a pioneer of improvisation in the 50s. And he talks about what happens to people when they're on a stage and they've been stupid enough to do an improvised theatre course, and guess what? They have no lines, right? They're on the stage, and one of the things that people do when they're on the stage is they will ask for a location that a scene might occur, right? So somebody might say, oh, the deck of a ship. That's a good location for a scene. And so some people will stand around on the deck of the ship, and like, within a few seconds, somebody will put a telescope to their eye, and they'll look out to the horizon, and they'll say, oh, look, a pirate ship. Now, at that point, the thing you learn if you do the improvisation course is that that's what's called an offer. So somebody suggested a direction that the story should take, and what you learn if you do an improvised theatre course is not to block that offer. Not to go, no, it's not a pirate ship, it's an oil tanker. Or you must have some kind of weird smudge on your telescope. You're not supposed to do that, right? You're supposed to accept that it's a pirate ship. But then there are some other subtle ways that people avoid or kind of undermine the fact it's a pirate ship. And one of the ones he talks about is people might say, let's scrub the decks. And from the point of view of a scared improviser, this is a very sensible thing to do, because it looks like you're doing something, but you're not actually doing anything. You're just kind of doing this, but everybody can do it together. They're not moving the action forward. Nothing is changing. And I see this a lot in projects. That there's some really obvious, these laughs of recognition. So, and especially if you're asked to like get involved in a project that's struggling, there's an obvious dirty grey pirate ship that's moving towards this project. There's a massive problem and people aren't talking about it, they aren't dealing with it. Very often what's happened is they have mentioned it and then they've been told off for being negative. And so they've learned that they're not supposed to mention it. And so what they do is they just scrub the decks. And they can do that forever. And so kind of one of the most straightforward things you can do, it's straightforward saying it, but it's not necessarily straightforward doing it, in a lot of projects, is to figure out what the pirate ship is and to try and somehow deal with the pirate ship. Now, the interesting thing from the point of view of improvisation is the audience want you to deal with the pirate ship, right? The audience want you to see a fight between you and the pirates. They want to see somebody walk the plank. They want to see the whole thing kind of like play out. But it's kind of the same with a project. That the only way to really make the thing be any success is to get this thing to play out, is to tackle the pirate ship, walk the plank, whatever. And so this is something that you see a lot, and the only real way to tackle it is deal with a pirate ship. Right, okay. Somebody can pick a joke now. Which one? That one? Okay. This is the first joke I ever wrote, I think. Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, he can sleep with his wife on Sunday afternoons. See, I told you they were nothing to do with the subjects I'm talking about. Somebody else want to pick a way of seeing? Right, two again. Never mind. I'll go with this one. So this is really, really intriguing, and it took me a long time to realise this. All projects are bets. They have a non-zero chance of failing. And a lot of what goes on in projects is actually pretending that that's not the case. A lot of what we think of as project management is just telling ourselves and telling everybody else that that's not the case. And so like kind of bets, you kind of associate them, I'm going to call them games of chance. And the intriguing thing about the bets in projects is that once you've kicked off this kind of bet, then lots and lots of other games happen. But as I was saying, I'm not sure whether you allowed swearing or not, but I swore anyway. So the interesting thing about this is that the way I've like explained this to myself is like, sooner or later, in order for a project to get started, somebody has to say, fuck it. Somebody has to shrug their shoulders and go, you know what, fine, we're going to do this, right? They've decided to take a risk. It's not a non-zero chance of it failing, right? And the interesting thing is that one of the first games that gets played is a game that's called Heads You Win, Tails I Lose. No, Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. And so that is that the person who kicks off this game is somebody who is reasonably sure that if the project goes well, they can take the credit, and if the project goes badly, they'll be nowhere to be seen. And that sounds like a really bad thing, but another way of phrasing that is, I don't know, entrepreneurial spirit, willingness to get things done. So kind of the person who's done this, who's like kicked off the project and shrugged their shoulders and said, fuck it, they don't want anybody else to acknowledge that this is a risk, right? So they will kind of like not be around if it's not going very well, and then be in the room as the minute it's going well. But also, the people involved in the project aren't innocent entirely either. There's this fantastic thing called the hiding hand. I'm trying to remember his name now. Somebody Hirschman. Eric Hirschman, I think. He talked about, he had a job, he had an amazing, like, kind of like 4 movies worth of a life, where basically he was Jewish and he just escaped Berlin just in time in the 1930s, and then he fought for the French army, and then he fought for the American army. He talks about being really impressed by the American army because they had uniforms, bullets, and food, which the French army didn't have. And then after the war, he worked for the World Bank a lot, and he was involved in projects all around the world, but mainly in third world countries. And what he noticed was that these projects, everybody who was involved in these projects wanted these projects to happen. And so they really kind of damped down any of the risks and problems. Even if these projects were fundamentally flawed, they kind of kept quiet about that until the project was really, really going, because they wanted the funding, they wanted the work, they wanted something to be happening. And he called this the hiding hand, which is a kind of pathetic economist's joke about the guiding hand, which is Adam Smith. But so this is something that lots of people who are involved in projects get involved in. They get involved in covering up the fact that there are problems with the project because they want, well, for a bunch of reasons. We all want to work. Like, if we spot that a project's flawed right at the beginning, we might keep quiet about it. I worked on a project once for a retail bank where there was this big architectural diagram, and on this big architectural diagram there was a transaction database. And we went along with this project for, I think, about 6 months. And then somebody mentioned that this transaction database didn't exist. Everybody knew it didn't exist. Everybody knew that the project wouldn't work unless it did exist, and it was never going to exist. So those kinds of things happen quite a lot. But that's not the only game that gets played. There's a couple of other ones. Actually, a few more than that. So on the back of the hiding hand is something that I call project management theatre. So this project's a bet, right? It's got serious, non-insignificant chances of failing, but we're doing all of this project management stuff, and we're making it look like if we do all this project management stuff, if only we do this project management stuff hard enough, then we're going to be guaranteed that it's going to be a success. No. We can do all of that stuff, and I've got no worries that doing kind of all the agile stuff and kind of transparency and inspection and adaptation, all that kind of stuff, is really valuable and useful, but there's still a good chance with a lot of projects that they won't succeed. Beyond that, there are a couple of things that you can do if you understand that a project is a bet that you might think are cheating. They would be cheating if you were betting on horses or if you were playing poker, but they're not cheating in projects. And that is, you can actually work to improve the odds on your project. You can actually find out what the project's about. You can actually go and talk to people who are going to use the project in the end. You can go and talk to people in the organization and find out what the story is about why this project was kicked off and why this was funded. And all of those things that you can do, which are kind of, they're not, I've been slightly cynical about project management and agile and iteration, but all of those things that you can do, they can actually improve the odds of your project. They can you can give it the best chance possible of being a success. Sometimes what happens is you get to a certain point in a project and you realize that the only way that you can improve this project, the only way that you can make this project work, is to up the bet. So people made a certain amount of funding. They thought that this thing, they could be made to pay off for this certain amount of funding. But in fact, no way. It's going to take a bunch of extra servers. It's going to take a bunch of extra staff. It's going to take a bunch of extra money. And the only way that you can really make this project pay off is by betting more. And that's a very difficult conversation, obviously. But the interesting thing about that conversation is you are at a point where you've got far better information than at the beginning when you said fuck it, or when somebody said fuck it. You've got it's a much better bet. It's not like a roulette bet in a casino. And at that point you can just say, well, actually, no, we're not going to bother. Or you can say, well, now we understand what we need to do in order to make this pay off, we can put extra resources in. So at the beginning of this bit about bets, I said that all projects are bets, and some projects aren't bets because they have no chance of success. And in the book, I call these nonsense accumulators. Does anybody know what an accumulator is? Yeah? So you bet on a bunch of horses, and each of the individual horses, they've got reasonable odds, but if you multiply all the odds together, then you get crazy odds, and if all 3 or 4 or 5 horses come in, then you're going to be a millionaire, right? What I realized on a bunch of projects that I worked on was somebody was doing the equivalent of betting on a bunch of different things happening, but 2 or 3 of those things were never going to happen. And so that project was actually, it had no chance of success at all. So I'll give you kind of things that people were betting on. Nobody really believes me when I say this. Implementing a software project in an office, back in the days when we were all in an office, with no access to internet or Wi-Fi. Compound that with implementing that project with no access to internet or Wi-Fi, with no access to the people who are actually going to use the project. We weren't allowed to talk to them. It sounds like a parlor game, right? So, no access to internet or Wi-Fi, no access to the people who are actually going to use it, and a bunch of pre-written rules for the coding standards that meant none of our code managed to get through and go green. Sometimes you're in a project like that. Okay, nods again. Right? So sometimes you're in a project like that that is just a nonsense accumulator. And sometimes you can fix some of those things. So the way I fix the Wi-Fi is with something called a Wi-Fi wall of shame. So, we had some Wi-Fi, but it was terrible. So I just said to the developers, every time you have a problem with the Wi-Fi, write on a post-it when you had a problem on the Wi-Fi and your name and stick it on that wall. And the wall filled up in about 2 hours and the Wi-Fi got fixed. I don't know by who. All the people I've been talking to haven't been able to fix it, but it got fixed. But some of those other things, not being able to talk to the people who used it, not being able to actually compile the code, they still tank that project. I think it's pretty useful as project managers to know when we're on a project that is dead, in a kind of Monty Python, this parrot is dead type situation, so that we can go somewhere else. Or not beat ourselves up about the fact that this project is not succeeding. Sorry, that's a bit of a downer. Somebody at the back, pick a joke. Thank you very much. Fur coat. Oh, I like this joke. Fur coat, no knickers. It's a weird way to describe a polar bear. Somebody else want to pick a subject. Another way of seeing. Maybe not as depressing as the one that we just said. That one? Okay, what we got there? Escape. So this is the way that I see my job. If I'm acting as a project manager, scrum master, delivery leader, whatever it is that what I'm trying to do is to help the software escape. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get it in the hands of the people who might actually use it. And one of the fantastic things about trying to do that is that I'm going to tell another joke, right? And this is apparently a joke that our king tells, is how can you make sure that you're not alone even if you're stranded on a desert island? And the way you make sure that you're not alone even when stranded on a desert island is that you take with you all the accoutrements to mix yourself a martini. Because the minute you start making your martini, somebody will jump out from behind a tree and say, that's not how you make a martini. And so this is part of why I want to try and get my software to escape, is by trying to get it to escape, I know that there's loads and loads and loads of different obstacles that I'm going to have to get through to get it finally into the hands of somebody who actually really wants to use it. And so you might think, well, why even bother? Why go through this kind of security committee? Why argue with these people about putting it on a real server rather than having it like on a test server? Why kind of go through all of the gates that you need to get it through? And the reason is because the nearer you get it to actually escaping, the more of those guys are going to jump out and tell you, you're not allowed to do this. Here's another committee that you haven't heard of. Here's another non-functional requirement that you haven't heard of. There's another project doing exactly what you do, whatever it is, right? So the further you get, the nearer you get to really escaping, the more you find out about how difficult it is to escape, which is good. But then, if you actually manage to escape, there's something else, something completely magical happens, which is, so Jennifer was talking about value, flow, quality, so kind of lean ideas. And one of the things that is very important in lean is this idea of pull. So connecting to pull, connecting to your people who actually want to use this. And most of the time, when you're doing project management, you're just being beaten around the head because you haven't delivered on time. People are throwing money at you, and it's, like, it's a lot of money, right? The real cost of software is fucking how much, right? That's how much software costs, right? So these people are throwing this money at you, and simultaneously they're trying to stop you releasing the software. Lord knows why they're doing that, right? But they are. But the thing is, if you can actually connect it to real people who really want that, then the dynamic of the project completely changes. Because these people who've been berating you, they're not, in some sense, your boss anymore. The people who are your boss now are the people who actually have it and want more of bits of it, or don't like bits of it, or kind of like they want something to be changed. And this is a wonderful shift in dynamic, because it just makes a change for just being consistently bollocked for being late. Or kind of, I'm sorry I'm swearing a lot, I don't know why I'm swearing a lot. But it just makes a change from that, but also you're doing something that's genuinely valuable. Right, so I worked on one project for the government. We'd been through all of this stuff, the arguments about being late, not meeting the deadlines. Do we really have to pay for servers? All this kind of normal kind of hoo-ha. And we had a product owner, and so this was for the magistrates courts. And we had a product owner who was a former clerk of magistrates courts. And so we demonstrated this thing to her on a laptop because they wouldn't pay for servers, right? So it was on a laptop. And she said, it was like a document management system. And she said, can you put that on a laptop for me? And we said, yeah, sure. So she kind of took this out and she talked to all of the other clerks in magistrates courts. And they're actually quite powerful people. And she said to them, well, forget the fact that there's some problems here with the UI. It'll be able to do this. And then when it does that, you'll be able to do this. And the dynamic of the project completely changed at that point, because the guy who'd been giving us a hard time and saying, oh, we're not going to pay for servers because it wasn't in the contract, or why are you so late and all this kind of stuff. We didn't work for him anymore. He worked for the clerks who were all saying, what do you mean you haven't given him servers? We want to see this thing. And we were still busy. We were still, running and all the rest of it. But we were running and we were busy with things that were actually valuable. And so that's the value of escape. Another joke. Oh, the Buddha. The Buddha says that we become the thing that we most resist, which in my case I think must mean I've been pushing very hard against a fat Yorkshireman. Right. Oh, right. This is the most philosophical one. Sorry about this. So somebody said to me, which bit of your book is the most challenging? And I said, I think it's the bit about the Chilean psychoanalyst. And this is the bit about the Chilean psychoanalyst. But I promise you, it's got some relevance to software development, right? So basically, there's this chap whose name is Ignacio Matt Blanco. And he was a Chilean psychoanalyst. He wrote books in the 50s and 60s. And he kind of very much went his own way, like kind of did his own kind of thinking. And he had this idea that I just about, like when I'm reading it, I just about understand what's going on with it. But his basic idea was that the unconscious believes in infinite sets. Don't worry, I'll explain that a little bit. And our conscious mind can deal with finite sets. Now, in terms of the mathematics, I really, really struggle. But a kind of gloss of that is that our unconscious mind is very excited by same, all, forever, and exact match. And so unconsciously, we're always really excited about same, all, forever, and exact match. And our conscious mind can deal with different, a bit, for a while, and different than an exact match. Why am I talking about this in relation to software development? Because I'm absolutely certain, if there's anybody in the room who's not had this conversation, then I don't think you've been involved in project management. You've been involved in something else, right? Which is, you've had a list of things that you want to do, and you want somebody, maybe they've got a name product owner, maybe they haven't, you want them to prioritize that list, right? You want them to pick out of that list whatever the thing is that's the most important. And then maybe after that, what's next? And what do they always say? I just want everything. And before I read about this, I just thought they were idiots and I was really annoyed with them, right? But what I realize now is that that's what your unconscious mind wants. It wants everything, right? Also, it's very, very difficult, and this is something I bet you've all experienced as well. It's very, very difficult for that, because that exact match thing, it's very difficult for the unconscious mind to really understand the difference between things that have just been talked about and things that are actually real. I'm right, aren't I? Right? So this project's late. How is it late? It doesn't exist, right? So in what sense is it late, right? It's just been talked about. It's not there. But this is this really, really powerful thing that kind of unconsciously is going on with all of us, and we all do it, right? We all want everything. We all want things to be exactly the same. When we've written down a list, we want everything that's on the list. We all do it, right? But what I realize is like some kind of, it dawned on me that kind of what's going on, like, for example, bringing this back to kind of Agile and project management, one of the things that's going on in project management is, in Agile project management, is that the 4 principles of Agile are essentially trying to inject a bit of some thinking into things that kind of otherwise would be all about all. So working software over detailed documentation. Let's have a bit of something that works. Rather than like focusing on this, like, rather than focusing on detailing everything about the thing or getting upset because we haven't delivered everything, you know? So it's, I remember this as in winter comes reindeer, Rudolph, right? So individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? So So I was talking about like project management theatre, right? So the idea with project management theatre is all you have to do is turn this handle on project management and you will get everything, right? And the reality is that everything is done by people, and people are all weird and cranky, and they're good at some things and they're not good at other things. And you have to try and do stuff with the people that you've got in the room. So that's kind of some rather than all. Working software in winter. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Again, this is avoiding this kind of exact match. I bet in lots of projects that you work on, enormous amounts of effort goes into showing that what you've done matches what you said you were going to do. Why? Why is that the most important thing? Isn't it more important that it's valuable? No. But it is, so like once you start to see, it sounds like when I said like, I know deliberately over-egging it, Chilean psychoanalyst, it sounds like it's crazy stuff and it's not relevant to what we do, but it absolutely is relevant to what we do. And also because it's the unconscious thing we go for is everything and all and same and exact match. It's always effort to be bringing things back to a little bit for a short space of time and something that doesn't quite match but is valuable. I waved my arms around a lot for that one. Right, another joke. Soya milk, right. So I spend a lot of time in Cafe Nero, and very often when I'm in Cafe Nero, I'm behind somebody who is being offered an alternative to cow's milk. Do you want soya milk? You want cashew milk? And I get really, really annoyed about this. In fact, I get so annoyed about it that I come out in a rash. I think I'm lactose intolerant. I keep streams. So this is connected to lean again, and so kind of like Toyota production system. Taiichi Ohno's book is a fantastic book, and very interesting. But there is this thing which is really important. That it's really important to remember, which is software development and making cars. Not the same thing. Not the same thing at all. And especially, that book is all about making the same car over and over and over again, like reliably, right? Whereas like what we're doing when we're doing software development is we're making a new thing. Very often we're making a new thing that is not like anything that's been done before. Or we're trying to do this for the third time when we know that there are two smoking heaps of projects that attempted to do this in the past. I once worked on a project where there was another project that had failed, but it was still limping along. And they turned up to our show and tells and shouted abuse at us, right? So it was like, so like crazy stuff that go on, right? But the point is, so there are certain things that you can learn from lean. But one of the things that it was like one of the forehead slapping moments for me was I realized that you can have value streams there's lots and lots to talk about value streams in lean, which is often associated with the production line, right? So you're adding doors and I don't know how you make cars, but some things happen, you stick things together, a car comes off the end, that's about all I know, right? But one of the things that's happening on software development projects is you have to build that value stream. You have to figure out how to put the bits together so that the product is valuable. That's not there, right? So, and this is part of it. It fits very closely with the idea of escape, because I'm saying that if you can connect to somebody who really wants it, then you've got a good idea what that value stream is. Otherwise, you can do something that's very, very similar to just mopping the decks, right? So because if you don't connect these bits of value together, and you will get it wrong, you will think that something that's really important clients is not important to clients. You will miss bits that they really, really value. You will fail to understand how expensive and difficult certain stages of the process are. All of those things can happen, but that's what you're doing. You're building a new product, and while you're building that new product, you're actually building the value stream. And so it does connect very strongly, as I said, to like escape, but it means, unfortunately, that a lot of the kind of stuff that people tell you about lean, it's not that it's rubbish, and I really like the books, but you have to do quite a lot of thinking and processing to take that stuff and put it together to understand how it works for software development, because it's just not the same. This is my favorite joke. I'm scared of ambulances. I think they're going to bite my legs. They come hurtling towards me, screaming, "Nino, Nino." I like it. Thank you. All right, okay. Commit. I read a book by a chap called Robert Cialdini. It's called Persuasion, and I can't remember what the subtitle of it is, but it's called something like 6 Methods of Human Manipulation or something like that. And it's basically a psychologist who he did lots of research with salesmen and marketers and various kinds of people who persuade people to do things that maybe they didn't necessarily want to do. And I can't really remember what the other 5 are, but one of the things he talks about is commitment and consistency. So this principle of commitment and consistency is used lots by marketers, it's used lots by other kinds of professionals. He calls them compliance professionals, to make people do things that they don't want to do. And the basic idea of commitment and consistency, as humans, we want to do what we say we're going to do, and we want to be consistent with previous things that we've said, right? And I'm not a huge fan of evolutionary psychology explanations for things, but you might reasonably think that the reason why we're like this is because in the past, people who didn't keep the word and weren't consistent with the things that they said were regarded as like mad or bad, and they got shunned by society. How things have changed. But the thing is that this kind of principle of commitment and consistency is very, very powerful. And this is terrifically bad news for project management, because when I do training courses, one of the first things I do is like I give people a flip chart paper. I say, draw a stick person on that flip chart paper. Write down as many words and phrases as you can that you associate with a project that's going well. And the first thing, almost always, that people write is, guess what? What do you think people write? On time to budget, right. Well done. And so on time and to budget are about commitment. They're about keeping promises. And so that's what people think project management is about, right? They think project management is about being on time and to budget and keeping promises. There's a bit of a problem with this though, isn't there? Because at the point when we make these commitments, even if they're informed commitments, then very often we don't know much, we aren't very well informed, right? So the point where we're asked for the commitment is the point right at the beginning of the project where we don't really know what's going on, right? That's if it's a fair commitment. Very, very often, the way these commitments happen is somebody just tells you that's the commitment. They just say, I was some stuff about Christmas earlier on, right? So they just say, yeah, I've told everybody it's going to be by Christmas. So that's what we've promised. No, we haven't. I didn't say anything to anybody, right? So like, but what really, really, really annoys me is that works. That you feel bad about not honoring a commitment, even if you didn't make the commitment. And in the book, there's this brilliant story about Robert Cialdini. He's shopping in a giant toy store in the States on Boxing Day. And he meets his neighbour. And he never meets his neighbour because they're both very busy. Says hello to his neighbour, and his neighbour says, I bet I know why you're here. And Cialdini, who's a psychologist, is very interested in this. He says, well, what do you mean? He said, I bet you're here to buy that robot dog, aren't you? And he says, well, yeah, I am, actually. How do you know about that? And he said, well, that was the toy of the year. All the kids wanted that toy, and before Christmas, it was really, really in short supply. And now guess what? On Boxing Day, it's not in short supply anymore. And I bet you bought your son something else because you couldn't find the robot dog. And then you had to go out on Boxing Day and buy the robot dog because you promised the robot dog. Right? So this is kind of powerful mind control manipulation that the people who sell toys are running on you. And Cialdini gets very upset about this and he says, well, I'm not going to buy the robot dog. And his neighbour says, no, you are. You can't not give your son the thing you promised him before Christmas. Right, so Cialdini realises that he's stuck. So there's no way of avoiding making commitments. Very often in projects, you're not gonna manage to get work. People are just going to get more and more strident and more aggressive, up to the point that you make commitments. But there are two things I want to say about commitments, and then I'll stop. One is that there's a wonderful quote that's often used from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's often shortened to, commitment is the hobgoblin of little minds. I don't know what a hobgoblin is, but it doesn't sound good. But the fuller quote is, a foolish commitment is the hobgoblin of little minds, which I think means getting suckered into foolish commitments is something that you're bigger than that. You can do better than that. I think that's what it means. And so I think it's really important when you're feeling bad about honouring a commitment to remember where that commitment came from. Did you actually make it? Was it forced on you? Were you tricked into it? And because if you were, then it's not a real commitment. And then the other thing is very often the reason that people have manoeuvred you into these kinds of commitments is not because they really need everything by Christmas. It's because they don't know what else to do. They don't know what else to do to control the project. They think that that's what project management is about. And it's your job, because you're bigger than them, to understand what is it that we can really deliver that will actually be valuable to them as an organization, to customers, even if we're delivering it with them screaming in our ears that we're late. And if you can do that, you will still feel miserable about breaking your commitments, but you will be in a slightly better situation. One of the things I try and do is I try and avoid do anything stupid to meet a commitment. So kind of delivering software at 3 a.m, all that kind of shenanigans. Because when you do that, you'll find that you've delivered something that's really dumb, and then people say, why did you do that dumb thing? It's well, it's 3 a.m. So you've got to realize that commitments are a thing that you can't really avoid, but also that's not really why you're here. Those are foolish commitments, and really why you're here is delivering value. Okay, right, one final joke. You want to pick a joke? Thank you very much. Time. So this is a very appropriate one for project managers. They say there's no time like the present. And some people say there's no present like time. But it's a rap. Thanks very much.